Hello again, Darren, and welcome back. It's good to see you.
Thank you, Alistair. Nice to be here for a second episode.
That's good. So today I'm looking forward to hearing more about the lineage of the practice with a specific focus on aviation, but also some of the more recent events, particularly post-millennium. And I really wanted to start, I'm not sure you want to remember this too vividly, but 2008, difficult times came. Crash at the end of 2007 in the States, subprime mortgages, it grew and it affected global economies. As a member, a senior member of the team at Scott Brownrigg, could you revisit that time for us perhaps and tell us what was needed to get through what was clearly an acute, an urgent, difficult time to keep the business moving?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say, Alistair, 2008 wouldn't be a year that any of us really want to remember too much. But also, it's worth noting that 2008 was referred to as the recession, but actually, in reality, it went on for a lot longer than that. And we didn't see the fortunes of the practice turn around really until 2011, 2012, which is a huge period of time for a practice. And it was during that time that we really looked at the practice in very closely in what we needed to survive. That was one thing, because workloads for every single practice around the UK in particular took a downturn. So we weren't alone in this, but it did mean that it was very difficult for to be an architect at that time, because there weren't the jobs around, and obviously we had to lose quite a large number of our staff, which is not a great thing to ever do. But leading up to that, and some of the things that actually seemed disastrous at the time actually turned out to be our saviour. So during the time leading up to the 2008 crash, in 2006, everything was boom time. We needed more space. People were putting the rents up, and the rent on our own offices went up, it doubled, but we needed twice as much space. So I realised that it was going to be a struggle to actually pay twice the rent for twice the space. So we found our own building to buy. So 2006, we acquired our own office in Covent Garden, so top end of Endell Street, which we are still in today. And it seemed happy days. There we are. We've got our own office. We've moved in. We've taken all 4 floors. That was the beginning of 2008. And then by October, within 1 week, 40% of our workload disappeared. So it was less than ideal, I think is how you could describe it. Coupled with that, I had an idea of centres of excellence for us as a business. So we looked at grouping sector experience in locations rather than having spread it across all of our studios. And that meant that we were able to exponentially increase in a really quick way our experience in sectors and really have the best out of it. So I moved education all to the London studio as a good example. And obviously all those government schemes, the Building Schools for the Future and PFI, just disappeared. So that was a real challenge as well. So not only did we have the workload downturn, but also a lot of our sector experience left us as well. So we had offices with not a lot to do, I think it's to be fair. But that office did prove to be a bit of our saviour, because at first, I was thinking, we now don't need any of this space. I managed to sublet the space we didn't need. That's good. And that covered all of our mortgage costs. So we essentially lived there rent-free for all of that time. So that was a real saviour. And I guess the only downside was that when I had to get it valued, it was worth a third of what I paid for it. So luckily we didn't have to sell it. But that's all part of it, and we didn't have to do that. But it was something that seemed a disaster at the time that actually turned out to be very fortuitous for us, because we didn't have the outgoings that some other of our competitors did.
I think in a way that's what you've said to me before in the past, Darren. It's about the long game sometimes, isn't it? It's not about the sort of immediate undulations of economies as they come and go. But I mean, having that asset in Covent Garden, playing the long game, looking to, although it was costly at one point and lost value, it's come back and it's been a safe place.
Yeah, and at the time it was the right thing for us to do. So nobody back in 2006 really could have foreseen the recession coming. So it was the right thing to do, and it has proven to be the right thing. But also, and obviously, we were talking about sort of senior leadership times at that time. So it's great when the going is good, but when it's not good, then it's possibly, certainly being CEO is one of the, it's fair to say, loneliest jobs to do, when you have to cut 50% of your workforce. And that was a vertical cut as well. So we had to lose a lot of directors. And I do think it is fair to say that nobody really wanted to talk to me because they were just worried I'd take them into an office and that would be the last conversation. So you were possibly the most unpopular person in the entire practice. So, but that is part of it. You have to take the roughs with the smooth. And we had to survive. We didn't have enough work to keep the practice going with the complement of staff we had. So, they were very, very difficult times. But during difficult times, that's when the opportunities emerge. And as well as subletting space, we then looked at how we were operating the business. And so we've always run with a 5-year plan. So I always craft a 1, 3 and 5-year plan, and a 5-year plan is a rolling plan. So we had that plan.
Yes.
So when the recession came, it wasn't a case of us sitting there and thinking, well, what do we do next? We had a plan that could address what we were doing, and there were 12 points in my plan at that 12. Time,
better than
which we can cover another time.
Sure.
But those 12 points were really important because, and I got everybody together and I said, look, we can't be selective on these 12 points. We have to do all 12.
Okay.
You can't just do 11 and say, well, the 12th one looks really difficult. We're not going to do that. So, and I still have that handwritten down actually somewhere, what they were. So, and we applied all of those and we stuck to them, followed our 5-year plan. And fortunately, we came out of the recession in a stronger position than we went in. Through good management of everybody. It wasn't just me.
Because that's very interesting, because of course it says 2007, it began 2008, but you're right that unemployment rates in the UK particularly carried on going up till 2013. So it was a 5-year window of struggle for business generally. But I noticed that in terms of income streams and diversification and this remaining relevant thing that this is what we're looking at and focusing on, is that you did start to look further afield in terms of studios. And I think Singapore might have come into the frame in 2010, perhaps. Yeah,
2010. So part of our 5-year plan was always to diversify internationally. So build on the success of certainly our aviation sector and our master planning sectors that were very strong at that time. And we wanted to have a much broader platform to the practice. So we really upped that a gear, I guess it's fair to say, Alistair. The UK was no longer the strong market that we had enjoyed over the preceding years. And we needed to look for new markets. So essentially we got on planes and we flew around and we met with other clients and other sectors in lots of different locations. And when we had some strokes of luck as well. So we won some significant competitions across the globe. And we then channeled our efforts into building an international business, which now is around 50% of what we do as our income as a company now. So that was really important. We were also committed to the fact that the recession wasn't going to beat us. No. We didn't have a choice. The choice was survive and thrive, or dive, I guess is the other thing. And the Singapore studio was part of that. So we had won a competition for Reading University. So we were appointed to design a Reading University in Johor Bahru, which is just across the causeway in Malaysia from Singapore, as it happens. And part of the requirement was, if we were going to do that project, we had to have a studio in Singapore, which, so no bad thing, really. We thought, well, this could be quite interesting. So we opened a studio in 2010 and we did a big fanfare. We were very well supported by the British government and in particular the the consulate. So we held an opening ceremony in the British consulate, which was amazing, and it was all very very enjoyable, and we thought it would never end. But it was a lot harder to set that studio up than you think, because you are in the epicenter of the world. You have everybody from the Antipodeans coming over, you have the Americans coming over, you're right in the center of everything. So it's a bull market, and it was not easy to develop.
And I think you're right. I mean, to make, this didn't just happen, did it? And I think that, from 2008 to 2010, doing that, going out there, and I think, again, you got on a plane. I mean, and the aviation theme comes back. And I suppose just to close, well, for me, I was thinking again of an aviation thing. There was a book by Tom Wolfe in the 1970s called The Right Stuff. And it was about the guys, the high velocity aircraft pilots who were trying to get into the NASA program to fly. And you had to have the right stuff to get there. And I think to survive that recession and to keep the business going, there must have been an element of that.
Yeah, quite possibly. I don't know.
So anyway, I was going to move on now to... There's a very interesting word that I heard in Scott Brownrigg a few years ago. Not the first time I heard the word, but certainly in terms of business, and that was the word horizon. And I think you've alluded to that already, or you've certainly alluded to the plans 1, 3, and 5. What would be great if you could sort of tell us about how that came about and how you've implemented it and how you continue to implement it.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, in our projects, we always use the term over many years about borrowed horizons. So that whole notion of not quite knowing what's going to be permanent in the design process, and that idea of determining what permanence is within schemes. So we always had this sort of view of where we wanted to go, but the 3 horizons really came from probably at the tail end of the recession years, when looking at how we're going to continue to build the business, we needed to really think about sort of engaging some management consultants. So what was key for us was architecture was changing out at the end of the recession. The things that people wanted from us as architects were changing. So the market was moving with not just IT, but also what we needed to be able to deliver was changing as well. So we had to look at what the services were, and could we broaden our service from being just a pure architectural practice. And we engaged a company called Capital Dimensions. The founder, Richard England, became a really close friend of the practice. We worked with him. Now we've worked with him for a best part of well over a decade. Really? And he introduced me to the notion of the 3 horizons, which looks at how we could then vertically and horizontally expand our income streams. And that's where that came from, Alistair.
Okay. Well, it's very easy to explain when you put it like that, and I can understand why. It's tangible, it's real, it's graspable. You can explain it across the business, outside the business, and it's simple, but equally it's sort of enticing and evocative, and I think it keeps you moving forward. I think as part of that, there was another word that comes out of this, and that's the word unit. And that first came into Scott Brownrigg in 2004 when the design research unit was acquired. But what I'd like to find out from you is how that notion of this unit, this component, this part of something bigger has been built in and become a building block of the wider offer that Scott Brownrigg now has. Could you tell us about that?
So the first one that really came along was, so you're absolutely right. We acquired the design research unit, which is still, a very strong part of our business today. And indeed, it's what we review all of our projects through. It's where intelligent architecture is embedded. And these podcasts are all, developed through. So DRU is a very strong part of the business. Design research unit does exactly what it says. And then the next one that really came along was the design delivery unit, DDU. Right. And a lot of our clients were asking us to deliver other architects' schemes, so become the executive architect, because our team had a great expertise in doing that. And I was at first resistant to it because I didn't want to undermine our design brand. That was really, we spent a long time building up a design brand, and then to be seen as a delivery architect that took away from that was perhaps not the direction we're going in. Now, that was then. And now, things have changed massively since then. And we built a team under a white label called Design Delivery Unit to do exactly that, to deliver perhaps practices who didn't have that expertise in-house and work with them to deliver their scheme. So it was a really good way of doing it. And the Design Delivery Unit today is one of the premier in the UK, if not the world.
Yes.
And it isn't just about delivery, because delivery we think about just, sort of perhaps one-dimensional creation of working drawings following a design. And that is not the case.
No.
It is about reevaluating that design that's been put together. And can we do it more efficiently, which involves a huge amount of redesign quite often, and then actually being able to build the building. So that team is a fundamental part of the business, and really came out of a necessity and a desire of others for us to do it, which we thought, okay, we will do this. So the white labeling then of unit was something that then sort of started to grow, and it then transpired that we had the design strategy unit that then sold workplace analysis. So we're still using that today. Yeah. We had the design management unit, DMU. So that does exactly that. So it looks at the early design process and how can we be more effective for our clients? How can we make sure that the buildings and all the processes are all in place? And that is something that we definitely offer to other teams and firms of architects as well. So that's a key element of that. And then, of course, we have the safety design unit, which really came out of a lot of our international work, where we saw that the practices we have in the UK, where we take safety very seriously, in a lot of locations, there is no safety. And not to forget, Alistair, Digital Twin Unit, DTU, which came out of a desire to find a way that we could design our buildings more efficiently and effectively and then monitor them after they had been completed. And I wouldn't say we were the only people doing it, but we're certainly one of the first to set up our own company that built digital twins of physical environments. And we are now exporting those services across the world. It's clients. It's a way of maintaining connection with our clients as well. After we finished a building, we can build a twin of the building that then, as things are changed in the building, the twin changes with it. So it's a super sophisticated way of being involved in the industry that came out of a need rather than just an idea of wouldn't this be a good thing to do?
No, I think it's fascinating that, you've got the building as a digital file, and you can occupy it, you can change it, you can modify it. And as you say, the longevity, the client relationship. And, if you need to rebrand the building in 10 years' time, you've got that basis. What I did want to come on to you again, this is just to shift back to something we did mention last time, but this is acquisition. So we've been through Horizon, we've been through Unit, and just wanted for you to embroider a little bit more about acquisition, and in particular, GMW. How did it come about? How did you do it? Why did you do it? What was the driving force for actually doing that? I think we may return to aviation on this, but could you tell me?
Yeah, so as I think you'll hear later in the podcast, when Chris Blow talks about aviation, the practice was a Premier League in aviation since the beginning of the 70s, and certainly by the end of it, we were the go-to aviation company. But over time, there weren't so many aviation projects, so our portfolio became out of date, and we sort of found it harder to compete in the market because some of the we weren't able to use the projects to bid for new ones. So I really wanted to get that sector back and get back to where we were, Premier League again. So I thought about, well, we can either spend many, many years doing this and get nowhere, or it would be quite nice if we can find a team that would like to come and work with us and join the practice. So that was one thing. We also were doing quite a lot of work in the City of London, but I wanted to do more. So I felt that was a really big growth area for us. And again, I was impatient. So I wanted to get there quicker than just sort of like spending time doing it. And I started looking around, and by pure luck, the partners of GMW, Collins, Melville and Ward, walked through the door one, I think it was a Monday morning, and said, look, we would really be interested in Scott Brownrigg considering acquiring us. Which was very left field. I mean, I had a letter first. They didn't just walk in off the street and say, would you buy us? It wasn't quite like that. No, of course it wasn't. But that was kind of, the memory I have. And we sat down and instantly, the partners, we got on well. We had an instant rapport. And obviously GMW had both aviation and City of London experience, and were seen as one of the very strong architectural practice in that field. But the recession hadn't been as kind to them as it had to be to Scott Brownrigg, and we had weathered it considerably better for a number of reasons that we've just talked about, perhaps. So they needed to join somebody. And it was as simple as that. So we interviewed all the staff, lovely teams, great experience, great portfolio of work, worked really closely with us. The projects that we saw coming through were the sort of things that we wanted to do together. And we sat there and said, could we work together? And the answer was yes. And we said, right, if we're going to do this, we have to all be trading under Scott Brownrigg. You can't have one over there and one over there. It's confusing to the market, so we become Scott Brownrigg. So day one, we became Scott Brownrigg. And Alistair, when you think about how most mergers, acquisitions fail, and the largest proportion fail, it's because, in my view, you don't spend enough attention on the people. So we put a lot of energy into the people. And you'll remember, because you were from GMW stable, Alistair. We were always over in the Battersea office, and we spent lots of time. We didn't just acquire it and go, right, okay, that's it, pick the bones out of that. We were over there the whole time, and we were getting alongside people and getting everyone together to that, those sort of soft skills to show that, look, we're all in this together. We've got a great opportunity if we do this the right way. And look, that was 10 years ago, longer now. And it's been a phenomenal success story that everyone has bought into for both companies. It's a reciprocal trade.
Yes, I mean, under the radar, I saw it happening, and my direct experience was working on Istanbul Grand Airport out there on the site office. Suddenly, there is the whole interior design team from Scott Brownrigg alongside us. They just came out. And it was immediate. The blend was fine. It was not a problem at all. And I mean, clearly you did your homework, and as you say, the city, but the aviation. And we're coming back to aviation again here now, because I think, as you say, probably the biggest lever in terms of practice profile since the takeover has been aviation. And we, as a business, have been working globally, really. But following Istanbul Grand Airport, we're now working on a second terminal in Medina and other airports in Africa. I wanted to bring you back to Heathrow, Terminal 6, and it'd be great if you could tell us a little bit about how we're progressing along that journey in terms of a design. What are the drivers for that?
You'll hear from Chris later on, or hopefully we'll hear from Chris, how we actually got into aviation initially, because that's certainly something that predated me. But in many respects, we've come full circle. So we were involved with Heathrow back in the 70s,
Sure.
when it was nothing like it is now. You wouldn't recognise it. And then to become involved and to be invited by Surinder Arora of the Aurora Group in selected competition to be considered for designing Heathrow West with Bechtel as the team was something we did now. It's probably 6 or 7 years ago when we first started looking at it together. Certainly it was pre-COVID. And we put a lot of energy, time into it and figuring that out. There's a huge amount of detail that's gone into the design and the business case for the both the third runway, but also how that runway is designed, the length of it, its impact on the local environment, and how then a new terminal would come in to as a competing scheme to the scheme that has already been prepared and as you've seen out in the press.
Yeah, it's a very, very exciting critical infrastructure piece, really, isn't it? And it talks about scale and complexity and the type of project that Scott Brownrigg can take on and manage. Maintaining the aviation theme, this would be a good time to bring in Chris Blow. Darren, I'm sure you have a number of questions you'd like to ask him about Scott Brownrigg and Turner's work on the terminal.
Now, Chris, which you'll hear in a second, I'm going to speak to Chris. It was one of the, certainly I think one of the legends of the practice. He specifically had an interest in aviation. And just as we've been talking about aviation experience with acquisition of GMW, Chris really laid the foundations for that for us. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to hear what Chris has got to say. Welcome, Chris. Lovely to have you join us today. Chris Blow was Director of Aviation at Scott Brownrigg and Turner. He started with the practice in 1976. He became a partner in 1986 and retired in 2003. We worked together very briefly when I joined the practice in 1995, and I remember bidding for the Electronic Arts campus with Chris. Along the way, following his retirement, he wrote and published a number of airport terminal books. Chris, I'd like to try and talk to you today about your work on Heathrow. But before we do that, I wonder if I could ask you, how did we first get into aviation? How did the practice first get invited to do aviation?
Gosh, that's not an easy question because it's winding the clock back nearly 50 years. But I joined the firm as a new boy in 1976, very hot summer, and I was commuting across from my old home in Hertfordshire. And it was quite clear that there was something big. Ken Gillam, who was the senior partner at the time, he obviously had something up his sleeve. But the first I knew about the aviation field was that he'd been asked to do a small project at Heathrow, some shops. And I got the impression that that was a taster. It was a way of putting Scott Brownrigg and Turner, as it then was, through its paces. But what was hovering was a big one. And it turned out to be an invitation to take part in a limited competition, about 5 or 6 firms, generally large firms, some of whom I knew, some I didn't, to do the big project which was coming up, which was going to be a rush job starting in 1980, namely Heathrow Terminal 4. But it was put on hold, and I was holding myself ready because it became clear to me that my brief was to win the competition. What I was bringing to the table was a lot of experience working in central London, knowing the model makers, the printers, the display makers, and all that. And when the starting gun was fired early in 1977, I knew that we had a few weeks to pull the big one. And we knew that they were going to be choosing not a scheme, but a team, because we knew it wasn't a real project in the sense that we didn't have the brief, we didn't have the know-how, the details about side slopes and radar ceilings and all that sort of thing at Heathrow. We knew that we were going to be chosen as a team.
And Chris, do you think that's what set us apart at the time? The fact that we understood that they wanted a team rather than a competition entry.
Well, that was the way we construed it, because we knew that we didn't have the specialist input on immigration and customs control, on a lot of the constraints at Heathrow. We knew that there was a site boundary, so we had that to fix on, but we knew that they were going to be appraising us not so much for the design solution, but for our ability as a team to turn the thing around very fast in a period of a few weeks and to produce the design, the drawings, the model, and eventually a presentation book. And I've got a copy of the presentation book here for you. I'll give that back. Give that to the firm. This was a personal copy that I squirreled away when I retired.
When we win competitions, it's as important for us to understand why we win them as much as when we don't win them. And I think from what you've told me there, we were first invited to do a few small shops, and we ended up designing the airport. Which is absolutely phenomenal. Can I ask you something else on this then? So we won the competition against some really big firms. They obviously had to know we could deliver, which is what you've just emphasised. But also there must have been quite a bit about the scheme that was prepared, and the brief emphasised space, speed, simplicity, and service. So what do you think set our concept apart, and how did we turn those 4 elements into architectural reality?
Well, the most important thing really was this innovative concept of separating arrivals and departures, segregated routes with all the concomitant advantages of speed of movement, which was one of the 4 S's, and we wanted to create a continuous commercial airside concourse into which all the passengers would pass through the central controls and assemble ready to board the aircraft. We, at the time of the competition, there were a number of fixes. One was the site boundary. Another was the idea that it would be built in phases, because the site wasn't all available immediately. So phasing was an important part of our presentation. And we came up with a physical model. We were still making physical models in those days. The firm didn't have a model shop, but I was charged to find a model maker to mastermind the drawings and to mount them on panels and be ready to move in at the invited day, which was Friday the 13th of May, 1977. It was a very hot day. And to move in with our presentation and to wow them with our ability to turn the thing round very fast. But we knew that they were choosing the practice or the team that they were going to work with. They were also, of course, looking for the scheme which we developed, which had to be compliant. We couldn't go outside the site boundary, for example, but we didn't know about things like height limits, because all that became clearer as the project progressed. And we knew that we wanted to produce absolutely stunning drawings showing the segregation of arrivals and departures, showing the landside vehicle movement, and we knew we wanted to make a physical model. We knew that we wanted to produce a presentation book, and this is the presentation book. I kept my own copy. I probably shouldn't have done, because this is really the firm's property. So I brought that in today, but I'm going to leave it behind, because I gather
Fabulous. Well,
Yeah,
perhaps
carry
we
on.
could use that for our 115th year book launch, Chris, and showcase it at the Building Centre on the 5th of November. So moving on a little bit then, Chris, from the competition. So we've now won the competition. You have used a lot of innovations. The airside long open concourse design, use of ramps, lifts, moving walkways, which allow passengers to intuitively move between levels and up and down through the airport, which was revolutionary at the time. Can you tell me a little bit how you saw this enhancing the passenger experience?
Airports are daunting places to people who are unversed in their working, and we wanted the thing to be absolutely straightforward for the passenger. And one thing was speed and simplicity, which was the planning the routes that the passengers would take, bearing in mind that there were big numbers. Thousands of passengers an hour were going to be passing through this, and it had to be simple, it had to be straightforward and easy for the passenger to use. So that was what we were working for.
Sure, and you mentioned the commercial role, so you understood how to do offices and lots of other different sectors. What role did this broad experience play in planning, especially regarding the retail, dining, and the so-called tree-lined boulevard that was almost unheard of at that time?
Yes, it was. It was innovative. It was interesting that other designs were going on at the same time. One other design, which was going through the same pipeline, was the design of what would eventually become Gatwick North Terminal. And the interesting thing was that didn't embody vertical segregation as it was designed. It was all remodeled later because they realized that vertical segregation of passengers, departures above arrivals, had to be the norm. So we were working against that, beside that background of trying to achieve simplicity, service, and passenger experience, and that was really where the airside experience was going to be important.
So Chris, I mean, I guess in many ways, Terminal 4 set the benchmark. Back in 1977, it was revolutionary. Would it be fair to say that it really did influence the future of airport design, both in the UK?
Yes, I think
globally?
that. I think there's a certain amount of pride involved in this. We were conscious that we were breaking new ground, not just this essential element of vertical segregation of arrivals and departures, but also the importance of the public transport link. And it was purely fortuitous, really, that the London Underground, Piccadilly line, had arrived at Heathrow in 1977 in the central area, but there was then, of course, there was no Terminal 4, which was on the periphery of the airport. And it was then the opportunity to do public transport connection from day one, not grafting it on afterwards, which was in many ways the case. I've some time ago, in my retirement, I wrote a book about modal interchanges, which was published and followed the sequence of all the writing and lecturing that I'd done on airport design. But we were conscious that the other element which had to set a new standard was the public transport being built in from day one. And it so happened that the corridor space was there for a low-level station on the Piccadilly line, which would form a loop. And it was interesting that when the central area, Heathrow Central Station, was opened in 1977. They hadn't, and of course it was all underground, under the central area in Heathrow, and they hadn't got space for standing trains. So they were looking for a solution which allowed them to take trains through the central area and to connect to a limb of the Piccadilly line running eastwards out through Hatton Cross. And that was what we were able to incorporate in the design. And time was on our side, because not only was the demand there, but the capability was there, because we had this ability to build a station box from day one underneath the terminal, in fact, underneath the car park, rather than underneath the terminal itself, because that was the way the passenger routes worked best. And therefore it was the case that Heathrow Terminal 4 had its link on the Piccadilly line from day one. There was an announcement that came over the public address in the central area of Heathrow when they started running trains there, and the announcement said, the train arriving at Heathrow Central Platform 2 is 41 years late. And the reason, how did they arrive at that? Of course, Heathrow had started in 1956, and the very first trains that ran into Heathrow were therefore that number of years late. What was special about Heathrow's public transport link was that it was there from day one. And when now King Charles and the late Princess Diana, when they arrived at the terminal to cut the tape, which they did, they arrived on the Piccadilly line underneath the car park and were able to walk straight up into the terminal and cut the tape. And that was a very special day. That was the 1st of April, 1986. That's right, 1986. That was a day that's memorable for all of us who've been involved in the project.
Yeah. What a lovely memory, Chris. And I think one of the questions I was going to ask you was really about how we learned from that experience, or how you learned personally from the experience of doing Terminal 4, and what was valuable to the practice. And I guess what I'm hearing is that it was really about getting transport to the airport first, making sure that it was there right from day one. It was very, very important. And for you personally, I think it was seeing all of those amazing ideas that you had of separating passengers on different levels and being able to see that come into fruition with Princess Diana and Prince Charles coming up the escalators.
Yeah, we were gratified when one of the first press reviews that we read of our building, because we live by we're not actors on the stage, but we live by the review by the critics. And it was very significant that one of the first press reviews that we saw was identifying the fact that Heathrow Terminal 4 was going to set new standards, which of course it did. It took a while to come into fruition, but it was gratifying to realise.
So that was amazing, Chris, and I mean for all of us that's in the practice, and and I'm sure for people who are in the aviation sector now, to hear some of that history is invaluable. What I'd like to ask you next is, so we're established now in the UK. We've successfully completed Terminal 4. How did we expand our aviation sector overseas following this completion of T4?
Wow. When I retired, the last project I did before I retired 20-something years ago was an airport in France. And that was one of the more, one of the local projects, because it was on the mainland of Europe, at Lyon in central France. But between the completion of Terminal 4, or indeed during the completion of Terminal 4, we had so many international opportunities. It opened a great big door to us. Suddenly, we were the team for choice for all sorts of airport projects. And one of the interesting ones that cropped up was the opportunity to follow work that had been done by the Japanese, who'd won a competition to build the new airport in Baghdad. And that opened the door to us because we were seen as being a team that was waiting to complete Terminal 4. The project had been delayed because the traffic build-up at Heathrow had not reached expectations in the late 1970s. And in 1982, Saddam Hussein, as was, wanted to be seen as a leader of the non-aligned nations, the non-aligned world. And he had a big conference booked in Baghdad in 1982. And we were commissioned to complete that design, which we did with French contractors, excellent French contractors who were able to turn around and build during during wartime, because there was a war raging between Iran and Iraq in the late 70s. So that Heathrow opened so many opportunities to it. It also gave me personally the opportunity to promote the practice through writing and lecturing. I had a lecturing appointment on the staff at Loughborough University, because there they were training airport managers particularly, and I was invited to speak to them about trends in airport design. And lo and behold, I found that one of the students that I was tutoring in the course at Loughborough University he became one of our clients, because he was the manager, the local manager of Bahrain Airport. And that was the next international project that followed Heathrow Terminal 4. We started that as a remodeling exercise to an original design by not Sir Alexander Gibb, but the firm of Gibb Peter Muller. And we moved in to Bahrain, and that was the first international project that we did, which was then followed by Iraq and so many others. I had the dubious pleasure of working, indeed doing a lot of competitions, not all of which came to fruit, but working in 37 different countries all over the world. And that was a way that SBT's name was getting well known. We were seen as the practice of choice for airports, whether it was in mainland Europe or particularly in the Middle East and the Far East. So that was a great big opportunity for the firm.
Amazing. Absolutely fascinating, Chris. So I think, Chris, one of the takeaways for me talking to you about how we pushed into globalizing our experience in aviation is that you wrote about it, you took an active interest in promoting how to do things better, what the right way to do things was, and you weren't afraid to get on a plane, no pun intended, to actually go and sell those skills globally.
That's right. And it was all because Heathrow Terminal 4 had opened the door.
Fabulous. Chris, I could talk to you all morning, and perhaps, we can get you back to do another podcast with us on some, I know you've got some other really broad experience of the practice and the history of the practice. It was a fascinating discussion, Chris. Thank you so much for taking the time to come in to speak to us today. And for me personally, fantastic to see you after nearly 2.5 decades. Again, you don't look like you any different to when you left the practice back in 2003. So, Chris Blow, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you all, and my very best wishes to the firm, sailing onward and upward.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chris. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Well, that was fascinating. It was really insightful for me. I have worked in aviation myself, but to see Chris and hear Chris telling us all about that moment in 1976, that hot summer's day, a competition, a six-way competition to win that. And I mean, all the terminology he's been using, I mean, the vertical separation, the air side, the land side, and there's so much more he could have told us. I mean, I was so interested in just how he had sort of examined, interrogated, and then changed the paradigm in terms of how the terminals operated. And for me, yeah, absolutely spellbinding, fascinating. Was there anything for you, Darren, that particularly resonated?
So I think, Alistair, I mean, I agree with everything you say. I mean, the key takeaways for me is that, I mean, Chris was pivotal for us in the development of the aviation sector. It was interesting to hear that actually it came almost left field through designing some shops at Heathrow that then went on to become one of the biggest things actually in retail design that we know today. The idea of retail in aviation, in airports, was something that really was hardly done then. So it all came in at around about that time. And I think the other thing is really that Chris lived and breathed that sector. He wrote about it, he took an active interest in it, and then in marketing it, he traveled the world. He went and told everybody about it. And we became the go-to architects of aviation design, which as a part of history back in the 70s, I think it's fabulous to hear it. We've been in the practice a long time, but to hear it for somebody who's there, since 1976, I think is wonderful. And a lesson for us all that, if you want to build a sector, then you have to really get out there and sell it. So thank you, Alistair. I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you for coming. Fantastic. Really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.